He arrived in my life like a shadow that pretended to be light, a man who carried the charm of someone who had studied the art of deception so long that it no longer looked like deception at all. His words flowed like honey, each sentence carefully crafted to catch me off guard, to weaken my walls, to make me believe he was exactly what I had been searching for. He smiled like a man with no worries, like someone who had conquered the game of life and knew the outcome before the dice were ever rolled. At first, I mistook that confidence for strength, mistook his flattery for truth, mistook his interest for something deeper than it was ever meant to be. I was blinded because he knew exactly how to cast himself as the hero of a story where, in truth, he was the villain all along. He built his web slowly, carefully. Lies layered upon half-truths, stories so polished that I could not see the gaps until they widened enough to swallow me whole. He spoke of his past as though it were lined with sacrifice and ambition, painting himself as a survivor of hardships that had made him noble rather than bitter. And I believed him because that is what he wanted. He learned my fears, my hopes, my weaknesses, and then he used them as keys, turning each lock inside me until I was open to him completely. He acted as if his victories were ours, his successes shared, and I clung to the illusion that perhaps I had finally found someone who saw me, valued me, chose me without hesitation. But cheats never stop at enough. Their hunger is endless. The moment he realized he had secured my trust, he began testing the boundaries of how far he could stretch it. He grew careless with his promises, extravagant in his stories, reckless in the way he tried to balance lies upon lies. He thought he had mastered control, thought I was too blinded by what he had already woven to notice the fraying threads. But a person can only feign perfection for so long before the cracks begin to show. I noticed the inconsistencies first in small details, things he claimed to have done that didn't line up with dates, friends' names that never matched when repeated, messages that seemed crafted rather than spontaneous. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that suspicion was the enemy of trust. But suspicion is the child of truth knocking at the door, and eventually, I let it in. He was too arrogant to believe I could outwit him. In his mind, he had already won. He had drained enough from me, my time, my trust, my resources, to believe I was cornered, powerless to resist the weight of his manipulation. But arrogance blinds more thoroughly than love ever could. He did not see that while he played his game, I had begun to study the rules. I watched carefully, listened quietly, traced the outlines of his stories until they betrayed their own falseness. Piece by piece, I unraveled the mask he wore, and beneath it, I found not the confident man who dazzled a room but a hollow figure scrambling to maintain an image he could not live up to. The day came when I confronted him, not with rage, but with the calm certainty of someone who no longer doubted the truth. I laid out the evidence before him. Not wild accusations but facts, contradictions, receipts, the trail of his deceit laid bare in the cold light of honesty. His confidence faltered for the first time then. I saw his smile strain, saw the cracks in the facade widen until the man who had thought himself untouchable looked very much like a cornered fraud. Still, he tried. Cheats always try one more time. He reached for charm, for persuasion, for the same weapons that had worked so well before. But I had disarmed him already. Once trust is broken, words are nothing more than sounds, and his fell flat between us, empty and powerless. He left that day thinking he could recover, thinking perhaps he would find another who would believe his illusions. But what he underestimated was that truth has a way of traveling faster than lies once it finds its footing. Those who once admired him began to see the same cracks I had seen. His reputation unraveled, his opportunities slipped away, and slowly, piece by piece, the empire of falsehood he had built crumbled beneath him. He had spent his life playing others, convinced that each victory was permanent, that each deception was a triumph carved in stone. But he forgot that games built on lies have no foundation, and sooner or later, the entire structure collapses. In the end, he lost not because I fought him with fire, but because he burned himself with the very flames he thought would keep him warm. He thought he had won when he deceived me, thought he had claimed another prize, another story of conquest to add to his list. But in truth, all he did was reveal the fragility of his own mask. His downfall was not dramatic. It was quiet, inevitable, the slow undoing of a man who believed he could cheat forever, without consequence. And I walked away scarred but wiser, carrying the knowledge that survival does not come from clinging to illusions, but from letting them fall and facing the world without them. He thought he had defeated me, but the truth is simple. I endured, and he did not. In the end, he lost it all, because cheats may win battles, but they never win the war. He thrived in shadows, the kind of man who could wear charm like a second skin, slipping into any role that suited his agenda. He had the air of someone who had practiced manipulation so long it felt like instinct. He could look you in the eyes and lie so cleanly, so smoothly, that you would not only believe him, you would thank him for the reassurance. His victories were not earned, but stolen, yet he walked through the world as though the theft gave him more right to them than anyone who had worked honestly for the same. From the beginning, I mistook his performance for sincerity. He studied me, learned what I wanted most to hear, and delivered it with perfect timing. If I admitted my fears, he cloaked himself in understanding. If I spoke of my dreams, he mirrored them back, convincing me he shared them. He knew how to shape himself into whatever figure I needed him to be. And for a while, I believed I had stumbled upon a rare ally, someone who understood me as no one else did. That was his specialty, making people feel seen while secretly hiding behind layers of lies. But no act is flawless forever. I began to notice how often his stories contradicted themselves. A friend he swore had betrayed him suddenly became someone he spoke fondly of. A job he claimed to have left years ago turned out to have ended only recently, if it had even existed at all. He promised money he did not have, offered help he could not provide, claimed connections that fell apart the moment I questioned them. At first, I told myself it was forgetfulness, small mistakes anyone could make. But there are no coincidences in patterns. His charm wasn't a slipcover, it was a mask. He left, furious but still convinced he could rebuild elsewhere, still convinced he would win again. But cheats can only thrive when the world is blind to them. Once the truth began to spread, once people began to connect the dots, he could no longer hide. Jobs turned him away, old friends cut ties, his allies became his accusers. The empire he thought he had built turned to dust beneath his feet. Slowly, inevitably, he found himself stripped of everything, status, trust, admiration, until he was left with nothing but his own emptiness. He thought he had won. He thought deceiving me was another triumph, another victory to feed his arrogance. But what he did not realize was that cheats never win for long. Every lie carries within it the seed of its own destruction, and his garden of lies bloomed into ruin. I walked away, not untouched, but stronger, carrying the lessons his downfall had carved into me. He, however, had no lessons left to learn, only the ruins of the illusions he had once lived within. He thought he had everything. In the end, he had nothing. Because that is the truth no cheat ever understands. The game always ends, and when it does, they are the only ones left without a place on the board. He was the sort of man who treated life like a stage, every interaction a performance, every word rehearsed. His voice carried a rhythm that could soothe doubt, his eyes held just enough intensity to mimic sincerity, and his timing, always perfect, made it easy to believe he meant every carefully chosen phrase. He had played this role for so long that even he, perhaps, forgot where the performance ended and the truth began. To those who didn't know better, he looked like a man who had mastered success. To me, at first, he looked like salvation. He drew me in with little things. He never rushed. He knew how to make patience look like devotion. He would listen with the kind of attentiveness that makes a person feel as though their words mattered more than anything else in the world. He learned what I craved: stability, honesty, partnership. And then he fashioned himself into the exact shape of those desires. He didn't stumble or falter. He delivered every promise with ease, like he had been waiting his whole life to give me exactly what I wanted. And I, blindly, foolishly believed it. But lies, no matter how polished, have seams. At first, they were small. A forgotten detail. A story told twice, but told differently. A slip in his memory that didn't quite match the perfection he otherwise projected. He covered them quickly, as skilled liars do, but the unease lingered in me. I tried to silence it, told myself love required trust, and trust required forgiveness of small flaws. Yet deep down I knew what he offered wasn't imperfect truth. It was perfect fiction. As weeks became months, I began to notice more. Money that vanished without explanation. Business deals that never materialized but always seemed moments away from success. Friends who spoke of him with unease, like they knew a different man than the one he pretended to be. Still, he thrived on charm, and when doubt crept too close, he smothered it with affection, with promises of tomorrow, with reassurances that sounded so sweet they silenced reason. He thought himself clever, thought me naive. Perhaps for a time I was. But even the most convincing performance begins to bore the audience if repeated too often. What he never saw was how closely I began to watch. While he rehearsed his lies, I gathered evidence. While he boasted of triumphs, I took note of his failures. While he painted himself as a man destined for greatness, I uncovered the truth. Unpaid debts, abandoned relationships, betrayals that stretched so far back he could no longer remember the faces of all those he had wronged.
He was not a mastermind.
He was a parasite, living off the trust of others, moving on when the well ran dry, convinced the world would never tire of giving him fresh victims. I waited until the mask slipped far enough that I could see him clearly. The moment came when he believed he had me completely, when he leaned back, confident, careless, certain that I could no longer escape the net he had spun. That was when I cut the strings. One by one, I revealed the lies, laid them bare like open wounds. Bank statements, messages, testimonies from those he had fooled before me. All of it, undeniable. He tried to laugh, but his laughter cracked. He tried to charm, but the words turned hollow. He tried to turn the blame back on me, but guilt only made him smaller, weaker, more transparent. That day, he didn't lose me. He lost the illusion of control. And once that was gone, his downfall had already begun. At first, he left with the arrogance of a man who believed he could rebuild elsewhere. He still thought he had won, thought I was just another chapter in a long book of easy victories. But the world is smaller than cheats realize. Lies travel faster than truth at first, but once truth emerges, it spreads like wildfire. His reputation rotted. The people who once smiled at him now whispered behind his back. Doors that had opened easily began to close. His name no longer charmed, it warned. I heard stories of him long after I was gone. Failed ventures. Friends who abandoned him. Opportunities that dissolved as soon as they began. He tried to play the same games, but each time, the audience was less willing to believe. Each time, the mask grew harder to hold in place. In the end, he was left with nothing. No fortune, no loyalty, no trust. And me? I carried scars, yes. But scars are proof of survival, not defeat. He thought he had broken me, thought he had drained me dry, and walked away the victor. What he never understood is that endurance is its own kind of triumph. I learned. I grew. I endured.